I think one of the skills I worked on most at Baseball Reference was using SQL, just because all of their databases are all on SQL, and pretty much any baseball or football or basketball stat that like you could ever ask for is solvable by just some SQL query by using these number of tables. They have game log data, they have like season data, they have just all these obscure different tables that are probably not used very often. But like if you're looking for an answer for a certain question, the answer is all there. It's probably the biggest sports database that probably top three in the world if I had to guess for the just the amount of information that they have in there. So
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Jeremy Frank. Jeremy is the creator of the Twitter account MLB Random Stats, which has amassed nearly 100,000 followers. He's currently studying data science at Purdue University, and he has previously interned at Sports Reference, the creator of Baseball Reference, Basketball Reference, etc., and for the Houston Astros, working on their research and development team. In addition, he's known for co-creating the popular Wordle spin-off MLB Pickle, MLBpickle.com, and co-authoring 2 books about baseball stats across the history of sports. In this episode, we learn how Jeremy was able to produce so much as only a college student, how to break into and differentiate yourself in the sports domain, and finally, we also dive deep into how sports teams use data differently from regular fans. I really enjoyed speaking with Jeremy, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. Obviously, you're still a college student, but you've done some pretty incredible stuff online related to baseball stats, and sort of blending that into more bigger picture data analytics and data science. I'm really excited for you to share your story about, one, how you've grown such a large Twitter following with your MLB Random Stats, I guess like Twitter platform. And I'm also really interested to hear how you're going to be using that to leverage into the next phase of your career after you graduate. Again, thank you so much for coming on.
yeah, Ken, thanks for having me. I'm a very big fan of not just the podcast, but also your YouTube series as a whole. I think I've learned a lot and developed a lot as a data scientist through a lot of your tutorials. So this is pretty cool for me to be on here. So thanks for having me.
Amazing. Well, I think one of the really cool things about putting out content and interviewing a lot of people is that it does come full circle. And I get to interview people who have viewed my stuff, or hopefully it has helped them in the past. And they're more than happy, like you're more than happy to come on and tell your really cool and unique story. So Jeremy, to get everyone a little bit more familiar with you, I always like to start with how you first got interested in data, but maybe also how you first got interested in baseball, because that's something that's pretty important to you, obviously. Was it a slow progression over time, or was there a pivotal moment that sparked interest in both of those things?
Yeah, I think it was just kind of like the way that I grew up. Both of my parents were big baseball fans, and I grew up in a family that valued education. So I was really into math growing up. So I think the obvious intersection between being a big baseball fan and being very good at math, and also not being good enough at baseball to play it at the college or professional level, is to look at it from more of a data science or statistical lens. So I think a lot of people like me grew up like collecting baseball cards and looking at the numbers on the back. Also just watching games and listening for all those fun statistics. And one example that I have is, so my dad was my little league coach, and for each game that we played, they had to keep stats in the scorebook and then enter them in, and keep track of them over the full season. So for our team, one of our assistant coaches, who was like an accountant or something like that, she had a spreadsheet where you can just enter in all of the stats for each game, and then had like a main sheet that summed up all of the stats from each different game and calculated batting average on base percentage. And this was, I was like 8 or 9 years old. And for me, Excel when I was 8 or 9 was like rocket science. I was like, wow, that's so cool. You just enter in all the stuff and it automatically updates. Like, oh, I went 2 for 4. My batting average went up by 10 points. But like, what if I went 1 for 4 or something like that? So that was like another experience that for me, just seeing how, obviously just the different data science platforms, I'll call Excel a data science platform, kind of work. I obviously learned more about other different means for data science as I grew up. But I think my first introduction was kind of just growing up a big baseball fan, and also being just good at math growing up.
That's awesome. I think baseball, probably more than any other sports, has a unbelievably rich history that's intertwined with statistics, with Bill James and was it the baseball prospectus. Um, I just did a video recently about sort of like a little light history of sports analytics, and it you know the nature of the game itself lends itself so well to statistics as well. There are these discrete data points. There's these stops in the game where discrete events happen, and I played baseball growing up quite a bit. I was very concerned with my own batting average, more so than anything else. But looking back, it might have been nice to figure out how to leverage those statistics to make a team better, or or to just dive deeper into them to learn about the game itself. And that's something you've done really well, and you've sparked a lot of interest in, is just learning about the game of baseball through statistics. Can you tell me a little bit more of that story and what that means to you?
Yeah, so growing up as I got older, I think my first like real experience with like this could be a career kind of thing was watching the movie Moneyball. I think I was probably like 10 or 11 when I saw it for the first time. And it obviously showed like, hey, there's a career path for nerds like you who like baseball and are good at statistics and understand math pretty well. So I think when I like first saw that movie, it kind of like set the foundation for something that like I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I didn't want to be like an astronaut or a firefighter or something. I just knew that like hopefully there's something out there for me when I grow up. And seeing that movie was like, oh, there's a career like for me. I didn't know like I knew what statistics were, but like I didn't know what the statistics major was at college. Like I didn't know what that entailed when I was in middle school or elementary school. So I think watching that movie kind of like laid the foundation for like me being able to see, oh, this is something I could do for a living. So as I got older, it was something I took more seriously. I kept going with my obviously trying to get better at math and watching a lot of baseball. And then my freshman year of high school, I actually started the Twitter account MLB Random Stats, where I kind of just wanted to get my name out there and just post these statistics for people to enjoy on their Twitter feed. I didn't realize how much of a big group there was of people who had similar interests as me. I didn't realize like just watching the movie Moneyball made it seem like obviously when the movie came out, baseball statistics was still a very, very small field. I didn't realize how 15, 20 years later, there was just a huge group of people who were interested in that and were trying to do this for their careers as well. So I think that was really cool for me to see that I wasn't alone in like the quest for this kind of job, that it was kind of more mainstream than it was. And also just yeah, how big it had grown.
I think that that's something that is particularly meaningful to me, and it seems like it's really important to you as well, is that through the internet now we can sort of self-select and create these communities or be a part of these communities, whereas locally we might not have that many people that are interested in the same things. There you might run into, like, at a bar or something, someone that's interested in baseball statistics, but it's not going to be the same level of interest that you have in data science, as well as actually making these things actionable for teams as well. And it's so cool that you can find these places online where other people are fascinated with the same things. You can share knowledge and information and push each other's understanding of the subject even further. And to me, that's something I've been so grateful for early on, and it's also something that I have a lot of admiration for you in how you've done it. You've built an awesome community, just helping people enjoy the game of baseball in a different way that they would have before. How did you get the idea of just like the random stats, or where did that come from? Or you were just like, were you just like looking up stuff and like, this is interesting to me, I'm going to put it out there? Or how did that evolve to where it is now?
Yeah, so I owe an awful lot of thanks to the website Baseball Reference for me starting my account. They have this really cool tool. It was called the Play Index back then, but I think it's called StatHead now. And basically, it just allowed you to query their database for a number of different like searches you could run. So you can look for different seasons matching criteria, different games that a player's played, or a different like a hitting streak or a home run streak, or a span of 50 games where a player did this. There were so many different things that you can look up, and it was kind of just basically like a way to communicate with their SQL database. And it just had like these. It wasn't just like writing a SQL query. They had it more on like a front end where you could select different stats and put greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, and just selected a number of criteria. The player was born in the United States. The player did this before 1990. There are just a number of different like preset options that you can put, but there were so many of them that you could pretty much find whatever you wanted. So I subscribed to this tool in 2015, probably like September or August or something like that during the end of the baseball season. And I realized like, wow, this is really cool, but like, what am I going to do with all of this? Like I'm paying like $5 a month as a high school student for just me to enjoy like looking up these fun stats. I'm like, well, this is pretty cool, but like I have nothing to do with it. So in October, a couple months later, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to like make an account on Twitter. I know Twitter is like a really popular place for people to like put out these things. It's not like Instagram where you're posting pictures or Facebook where I don't know what anyone does on Facebook, but it's more like you can like actually just share things and people can spread the word if they enjoy it. That's kind of was my impression of Twitter. I hadn't used it too much at the time. So I started the account in October and just started tweeting out all the stuff I found. And most of it wasn't interesting. There might be a couple people out there now that if they were looking at my first tweets, be like, oh, that's pretty interesting, maybe because their favorite player or their favorite team or something like that. But it was just stuff I found. There was no filter. It was like not filter in a bad way, but there was no like minimum bar I needed to hit for this tweet to be interesting. It was just everything I found I looked up. Like I think one of my first tweets was like finding the last player who had twice as many extra base hits as singles in a season, which is like mildly interesting, but at the same time, just very, very random. So that's why I named the Twitter account MLB Random Stats. And that's kind of why I started. And I kind of kept subscribing to this tool. And as I kept tweeting more, people actually became interested with these fun random stats that I had posted. So I kind of just ever since then, just kind of kept with it throughout high school and college.
That's awesome. What was the first like big tweet that you had that got a lot of people interested and sort of maybe headlined a lot of your growth?
Yeah, so I think it was probably like 2 or 3 years into the account at the time. I think I probably had 15 or 20,000 followers, which was definitely a lot of followers, especially for a high school kid like me who was definitely not used to communicating to big groups of people. But I sent out a tweet at the time. It was about Reds first baseman Joey Votto, and it was about how he had over the past like 10 years of his career. I think he only had like 7 or 8 total pop outs to infielders in like an entire span of a decade, where like the average player, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the average player pops out like 20 times more often than Joey Votto, which is really, not only is it like really impressive, it's just really kind of peculiar. It's not something you watch for in a game. It's not something Aaron Judge hitting 60 home runs. We all know that Aaron Judge is hitting 60 home runs, but we don't know that Joey Votto has only popped out 4 times in the last 3 seasons. But then once you know it, it's like, wow, that's like really impressive, because then you're watching games and it's like there were 3 pop outs just in this game and none of them were Joey Votto. So it's kind of a cool like mix of really impressive, but also like no one really knew about it. So that tweet was on so many different like websites, like the New York Times wrote an article about it. I think they were like, they interviewed Votto about it after a game. It was really cool to see. I don't hope I didn't get in his head. I know he hasn't been as pop out averse in the last few years as since I tweeted it, but I think that's more of just the way baseball the way baseball goes. But that tweet got me probably 10 or 20,000 followers alone. So like doubled my account and really gave me the confidence and like the momentum to just kind of keep it up and show that like people were really interested in those kind of things, and just kind of the desire to find the next one of those stats has always been with me. To like, I tweeted at like 1 a.m., went to bed and woke up and like I had like 1,000 notifications on my phone. And as overwhelming as it was, it's also for someone who puts a lot of their like self image on Twitter. It was a pretty cool feeling for me at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think it's cool. I personally believe it's very interesting for other people as well. Just looking at a game that so many people are obsessed with, they're so close to through a different lens is something really powerful. And that is the power of the data science work that we do, the power of any random stats that are out there.
Yeah,
It's taking something that we're familiar with and viewing it through this maybe like altered state, which we're not familiar with. And I think that there's probably some really interesting lessons in how to communicate things effectively in that. Where it's like people are interested in the tidbit. They might not be, yes, they're interested in, oh, Joey Votto batted 313 this year with, 38 home runs, whatever it is. But there's something inherently more intriguing about the anomaly of his pop outs that's out there that could tell a missing piece of that overall story. Maybe he goes back and talks to his hitting coach and is like, why am I, maybe I should be hitting more pop outs to the
Yeah.
infield if that's part of a normal distribution or whatever might be of hits. Um, so I personally, that one is very interesting to me in general as well. Um, in that vein of taking the random stats and making them more cohesive and telling a story, you're also in college an author of two books, if I remember correctly, and possibly a third one in the relatively near future. Can you tell me about how that started, and where the books are now, and what was the onus and the plot behind those?
Yeah, so it was my junior year of high school when we kind of got the idea. It was me and one of my Twitter friends. His name is Jim Passon, not to be confused with the popular baseball writer Jeff Passon. They're two different people, but Jim runs an account similar to mine on Twitter where he posts random tidbits. He posts less often than mine, but I think his tweets are more impressive per tweet than mine are. I have the volume. I think he has more of the the quality of tweets. He spends a lot of time. But anyways, we've been close on Twitter since we had both joined the website and just sharing our love for random stats, I guess. But we had decided that I think we probably had 50,000 tweets at the time. And we're like, wow, like we have so many tweets about baseball stats. Like we should come up with some way to organize these so like we can look at them from instead of just scrolling through our self-admittedly random feed, just have some kind of order or some kind of semblance to it so we could like someone can learn from them if they wanted to instead of just scrolling through our timeline, like have a way to learn about baseball. So the idea didn't start with a book. It was more just like coming up with some way to organize it. But our idea was we'll go through each year of baseball history and just find all of the tweets we had put out about that year. So it started with 1876, which was the first year of the National League. And we just did a Twitter search for our tweets from people, stats mentioning the year 1876. And some of them were about players from 1876, like the primary focus of the tweet. But some of us, oh, like this player did something for the first time since this player did it in 1876, which is obviously not about the player in 1876. But when you're looking at it chronologically, you could say, okay, he did this, and then no one else did it until 120 more years later, which is I think just as impressive. It's obviously maybe not on Twitter. It's not as impressive to put the main focus on the player from 1876 that no one's heard of. But when you're looking at it from a chronological perspective, like, oh, this was really impressive, and no one would do it until Jacob DeGrom did it or Clayton Kershaw did it or whoever it was. So it kind of puts it in perspective for the modern viewer. So we had realized like, wow, like we have a ton of these tweets. Like it was probably like 10 to 15 to 20 stats per year just off of stuff we had put on Twitter. So we're like, okay, like we should definitely like do something with this, like come up with like some PDF or something. And so the idea ended up going into putting it out as a book. It wasn't like a super like extremely difficult process. It wasn't like we had talked to some publishers, but ultimately it wasn't about making money. It was more just about like kind of putting our name on something that we had done and offering it to people to learn about baseball. So we self-published it through Amazon. And the book had gotten so long. It was originally just going to be one book of baseball stats, but the first 40 years of baseball were already 250 to 300 pages. So we had to break it up a little bit to avoid like a Harry Potter size book of baseball stats, which probably would have been pretty cool, but it was also took a long time to write. So in addition to all the tweets that we had put, we'd also done a lot more research when we had decided on the actual book being a thing. So we probably doubled the length of the book just by going back again year by year, looking at leaderboards, looking at things that had happened, looking at newspapers to try and find more interesting things that had happened. So basically, the books, the first two books that are out, the first one goes from 1876 until 1919, which is the end of the dead ball era. And then baseball kind of fundamentally changed in 1920 when Babe Ruth started hitting a lot of home runs. And so the second book goes from 1920 until 1969, which is the year after they had to change the mound rules because Bob Gibson was so dominant as a pitcher. So I think those are two kind of like big era breakups that we decided to go with the books. The third one is in progress, but I'm in college and Jim just had a baby, so it's kind of been slower on the writing portion. But hopefully it'll be released at some point. But again, the idea of the books is just a chronologically sequenced list of baseball stats. It's just a bunch of fun facts that you'd find if our Twitter accounts existed in 1924. Like, what would we be tweeting about if Twitter existed and we had the capacity to look all these stats up? And it's kind of cool to look at it 100 years later because it definitely a different perspective than the most famous players necessarily were in 1924. I think there are a lot of underrated players that have kind of come up that maybe weren't as talked about at the time or maybe should have won an MVP So I think if you want to learn, it's not about baseball stats themselves. It's not like learning about Bill James in whatever year he started writing about baseball or whatever. It's more just looking at what happened in each year and then kind of applying modern like baseball stats to the seasons and explaining it through like a modern frame of reference, comparing them to modern players. So that's kind of about the books. I think it's a really, obviously I'm a little biased, but I think it's a great way to learn about baseball. It's not like a work of literature. I'm sure there might be a couple grammar mistakes I got through the editor in there, but overall, I think it's a good way to just have a good understanding of the history of baseball through its most important players and stats.
Well, I really like, and it seems like this is a way for you, and you said it yourself, to organize a lot of the stuff that you guys had. So now it's not MLB random stats; it's semi-random stats correlated,
Yes.
collated by year, which is
Yeah. Graph.
which is a nice touch.
Yeah.
So the first book is called Hidden Ball Trick, correct?
Yeah. That's what this series is called. So it's hidden ball trick, the baseball stats you never thought to look for, and it's just volume one and volume two are out there already, and then volume three hopefully comes out at some point in my lifetime, hopefully in the near future. We already have probably half of a book written out, but the last half of the book is probably the hardest part, especially with how busy we both are. But the goal is to eventually complete the set with the 1970 season, starting with it and going until the last season that is before the year that we publish it, and then maybe combine them all into one big book if you want to buy the collector's edition or something like that. But the first two books are out there, so
Nice. Well,
when they're
there's a
on
lot of.
if you want to check them out.
I feel like you could stop it at like 1990 or like 2000. When was the lockout and like the steroid era? That would probably be cool to go through, um, and then
Yeah,
do another one
definitely.
if you really wanted.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like the era probably doesn't end coincidentally with the year that we're writing the book, but at the same time, it's like a lot has happened in the last 15 years, and it's probably we probably don't know what era it falls in. We don't know if 2022 falls closer to Barry Bonds in 2000 or unknown baseball player in 2040. It's hard to tell right now, but I think you're right. I think if we're looking at it, if we're writing these books in 50 years, we probably do end the books before like the fourth book includes 2022 instead of the third one. But yeah, I think you're right.
I love it. Well, I'm definitely gonna link the books in the description of the video portion of this podcast. So anyone who is interested, definitely go check those out. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to ask you about college. So a lot of people, I get a ton of messages. They say, "Ken, how do you get into sports analytics?" And to be perfectly honest, I took a very roundabout way to do it. Started a consulting company. We started working with sports clients, not necessarily a more traditional route of working for a team directly or any of those types of things. One of the biggest questions that I get is, what should I study? How should I approach it? What types of experiences should I get to land a role in that field? Obviously, we'll talk about your internships a little bit later, but I'm interested in high school going to college. How did you approach your college experience? What were you looking to study? What were you looking to get out of that with sports analytics in mind?
Yeah, so I think that what I was looking for in college, I think I've gotten a lot of messages as well from people in high school. What do I study in college? I think I have a different view on it now than I did when I was in their situation. I think it's probably a little bit more of a like a wider, like more like a better view. I think it is. But for me, it was like I want to work in sports analytics. Like, what should I major in? So obviously, there's like sports management is an option, computer science, statistics, math, data science. Like those were all the options that like if I really wanted to work in sports, what did I want to do? And I also realized that I think I had some maturity that I realized like, hey, I'm 17 years old. Like, what if I don't want to work in sports analytics? Like, I should find a field that is also beneficial for me if I decide I don't want to do this for a job, if I want to keep it as a hobby, like I was doing in high school and early college. So I decided that I wanted to study either data science, statistics, or computer science, like whatever. I think they're all in this a similar realm. I think you can pick up the skills and knowledge from one of the three if you study one of the other ones. So I ended up looking primarily for data science. I just think that there were some schools that offered it, and the program seemed most like fit for what I wanted. I wasn't like looking to go into software engineering, even if I didn't do sports analytics. I didn't think I had the understanding of programming at the time to want to do that or be able to do that, even though I had taken some computer science classes in high school. And I also was really good at math, but I didn't think a math major would be good enough to do a lot of things. Like I didn't know what a math major was, which is one of the reasons I was so scared of it. But I think it's not as applied as some other like obviously applied math and applied stats exist as well. So those are kind of the realm I was looking at. But I decided data science. I hadn't heard of the major when I started looking, but there are a lot of schools nearby, like in the Big Ten, that had offered it. So I looked into it, and it was kind of just a cross between statistics and computer science. The way I describe it to people is like it's not like a double major, but it's like a three quarters of both. It's like you get the understanding of statistics and some like deeper like lessons in statistics without going into like the super theoretical parts of it. And then you also learn how to program in computer science, but the coding you do is more with the lens of statistics in mind. So I think it's probably like three quarters of both of them. And I think that's what I really wanted to get out of it. If I wanted to learn the other one fourth that I didn't get in college, I had the basis of the foundation to be able to pick it up. But I really just wanted to get my feet wet both in some kind of math field and then also some kind of programming to apply it. So I will say that I don't think that like for me, I think that was the right option, but I don't think that's what you have to do to get into sports analytics. I think one thing I've learned in the past like couple of years is that most people who work in sports analytics get there in a roundabout way, like yourself. I think having worked in a front office this past year, I think the majority of my coworkers did not major in statistics or computer science. They majored in philosophy or history or petroleum engineering or neuroscience. Like people who are smart and creative will get the jobs that they want, even if it's not in the jobs that they had initially signed up for. So I don't think not picking the right major would have hurt me as long as I like stayed focused and stayed driven to what I wanted to do. Because there are so many people in there that didn't want to do baseball until the year before they got the job or something like that. It wasn't even in the forefront of their mind. They didn't go to college with that goal. So obviously, I think it's important to start as early as your interest starts, but at the same time, I don't think that choosing a major is gonna choosing the wrong major, quote unquote, is gonna set you off on the wrong path.
I really want to emphasize that point that you're making, that essentially our careers are a lot more malleable than we think. It's, if you start in one area, it just takes a little bit of elbow grease to transition over. You don't even necessarily have to do another degree. You just have to put in the work to learn the relevant and prerequisite skill set, probably try to do some relevant projects or get relevant work experience. And I think you've done an unbelievable job of positioning yourself as maybe not like a subject area expert, but building out a portfolio that clearly shows that you have interest in a specific domain. Having a Twitter account that has hundreds of thousands of followers, writing a book in the space. I don't think anyone approaching you about a job would have any doubts that you're interested and you have relevant skills, or at least the the baseline prerequisites of breaking into this field. And to be perfectly honest, like anyone can go write a book and publish it on Amazon, right?
Yep. I was able to do it, then someone else can easily do it too. I was a high school senior when I did it. It wasn't that difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you probably have a lot more dedication and passion for that than most people do. But the idea is the barrier to entry for those types of things that can give you a tremendous leg up or exposure or whatever it might be. It's all out there. I think one of my favorite sayings, I forget where I heard it, but the idea is that it's simple to do these things. It's simple to build a portfolio. It's simple to get exposure. It's simple to know all the right things to do, but it's not easy, right? It takes a lot of effort. It takes posting, daily or weekly or whatever it is on Twitter. It takes organizing all of this information into a book to put it out there and have your name on it. None of those are easy, but inherently it is not very complex. And that to me is something that a lot of people don't grasp. Um, Again, I really like that about your story and about you, that you've gone through and done these really these things that a lot of people, especially your age, probably wouldn't think to do. This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux, and they can be configured with the data science software stack. With the stack, you can get right into doing the data science work on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. That's kind of what I tell people. I think there are a lot of other good examples, especially because you don't even need to write a book. Like the internet is out there. You can put something on GitHub or make a personal website or something like that. It's as simple as like doing a project and putting it out there on Twitter or social media. Like there are a number of people who I know who have gotten sports analytics jobs just by publishing a really cool project on baseball, and then it gets 50 retweets on Twitter, and five of the people that see it are people who are hiring for sports analytics jobs in baseball or something like that. Like there are a lot of good examples for how easy it goes to just come up with something that is cool and something that people are interested in. Not necessarily related to like the random stats, but like there are really good examples. Like I don't know if you know the umpire scorecards account, where after every game, the next morning it just shows a really cool graphic with all of the pitches for the previous game, and then whether or not they were strikes or balls. It shows the percentage of calls correctly by the umpire, like whether they called balls or strikes better or worse than like average or stuff like that. They have a lot of cool statistics and a nice little infographic. It's very simple. You know what you're getting from that account every day. The project, like I think fine tuning it definitely took a lot of work, but it's something that the data is all publicly available. It just coming up with a script to every day grab this information and make it easily digestible and then come up with a Twitter. I'm saying it sounds very complicated, but all this stuff is stuff that you can Google and find out how to do. It's just, like you said, it's just knowing, like being driven enough to like want to like come up with that on your own. Like it's a very creative idea, which I think is why it does so well. It's not because it's something that no one else can do, but people love it. It has 200, 300,000 followers on Twitter. And the person who did it is I think he's in college. I think he's younger than I am. So I'm sure if he wants to work in baseball analytics one day, he's got this project that I'm 100% sure at least five people in each team's analytics department are very familiar with. Like in our Astros group chat, like we would send, oh, like here's the umpire scorecard from the previous day. It looks like we got a little hose from our guy yesterday or something like that. But
Well, I'm sure
everyone
Angel
knows what this is.
Hernandez absolutely
Yeah,
hates that account. It's
yeah,
Angel
I'm sure,
Hernandez who's like
he does.
ungodly bad, right?
Yeah, I'm sure he is not a huge fan of that account. But yeah, I think it's just one of those things where if he wants a job, everyone knows who he is. I think it's not the same with me, but a lot of people who I've approached who work in analytics are at least somewhat familiar with my account, some of the things I've tweeted out, and I think just having that knowledge. Obviously, you don't need to build a following with that big of an account, but just even on a smaller scale, if you have a project that even just a couple teams have someone that's interested in it, like that's all you need. You don't need a job with all 30 teams. You just need a job with one of them if that's what you want to do. You just need one person to be interested in it. That's a really good idea. Like we could use this kind of thinking on our team. So I think that's kind of like what you said, just the way
Yeah,
to go.
I think that it seems like it's an intersection of just output, doing the work and learning, and also in some sense marketing. I mean, marketing definitely helps if you're on a platform, if you're sharing it. If you're doing good work and you're sharing it, it's likely that other people will share it too and put it out there. And to me, that's something that people don't realize. And even if you're not doing good work right now, it still pays to put it out there because people will give you feedback. They'll tell you how to improve. Some parts of the internet might be not as friendly, but there are a lot of parts of the internet, especially on like LinkedIn, for example, where if you're sharing the projects you're doing, if you build something that you think is cool and you want to put it out there, people are very supportive of those types of things. And in my mind, just creating that comfort with putting yourself out there is something that also goes an incredibly long way. You think about it in the interview process, you're putting yourself out there, you're sharing your portfolio, you're having to talk with these people to convince them to give you a job essentially. Is that really more difficult than sharing things online where you don't have to talk to someone face to face, where there's probably a lot less nervousness and anticipation? I it probably varies by person, but
Yeah,
to me that's a pretty easy trade off. I mean,
yeah. I think the communication skills translate to. I think I'm a lot more confident in myself as a speaker and as a communicator than I was when I entered like college or when I graduated high school. Even though I haven't done like many speaking opportunities, like obviously I'm on this podcast, which is something I would have not been comfortable with doing when I was in high school. But I think a lot of that confidence comes with the fact that people respect my opinion for whatever reason because I'm good at querying baseball stats on Baseball Reference. That I guess that's good enough to lend me some credibility in baseball, and I think that confidence gives me like the ability to be a better speaker. And I think I would interview better now than if I didn't have the confidence from having just tweeted out all of these different things. I think that the skills definitely like translate from one to the other.
absolutely. And there's the idea of social proof too. If there's a lot of people following you on a platform, there's a lot of like frankly idiots that have a lot of followers, especially on YouTube. Not in the data space or anything like that,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking like Logan Paul or something like that.
Yeah.
But there is the idea of social proof. If 100,000 people are willing to listen to this person or follow this person, they're probably not saying all total gibberish. And to credit the people on YouTube, even if they are idiots, the stuff that they're producing is probably at the very least entertaining to somewhat of
Right.
people. So you can't discount that either. Um, Something that I'm really impressed with is that you were using Baseball Reference, and then you inevitably started working for them as an intern, if I recall correctly. That's something that I personally did with DraftKings. Like I was using their platform a lot, and then I started. I interned there for a summer, and I think that one of the best possible internships you can get is with a product that you're familiar with. It's probably the lowest hanging fruit because you know the product so well. Can you walk me through that experience and what that meant to you and essentially what it was like?
Yeah, it was really cool. It was funny. I like obviously I'm a huge user of their website, but for some reason I didn't see the job posting until 2 days before like the deadline day. So I had to scramble to put something together for an internship for that summer. But I applied and I obviously had a lot of confidence going in because I had a really good pitch saying, hey, like I bet you out of all of the hundreds of applicants that you have for this position for this internship, like I bet you like you could take the not like the next five people combined, and I probably use your website more than they have combined. So like I have the familiarity with it, and obviously like I know like sports and I have the data background. So I was definitely really confident going to the interviews, and luckily that confidence paid off for getting the job. But basically, yeah, it was a really cool experience. I did some really cool things with just like gathering data and formatting it better for their sites because I think their sites do a really good job of not just having like correct information, which is obviously one of their pillars, but also just having a just huge breadth of information. They have a lot of things that like many other sites don't have. Like the number one source for this piece of information is on Baseball Reference or Football Reference or whatever site you're looking on. So I think that the combination of accuracy and detail that they go on was really cool. There's always more out there that they want to add. I got there and here are 10 projects that you could work on. Just do it whatever you're most interested on. Like finding people who are GMs of baseball teams to put them on the site, or like correcting passing yard data from 1960s from using newspapers. Like there were so many different projects that they had, which was really cool to just be able to see how. Like I definitely took for granted that the information was already out there for me to use when I started my account. I'm like, wow, like this is a crazy amount of work that like someone had to do. It wasn't all the people who work at Baseball Reference. They obviously buy their data from different groups, but someone had to look at a newspaper and put this into an Excel file for this to eventually end up on Baseball Reference website. I think I kind of took that for granted, that the information was all there. So I think it gave me a really big appreciation for that. And then also, I think one of the skills I worked on most at Baseball Reference was using SQL, just because all of their databases are all on SQL, and pretty much any baseball or football or basketball stat that like you could ever ask for is solvable by just some SQL query by using these number of tables. They have game log data, they have like season data, they have just all these obscure different tables that are probably not used very often. But like if you're looking for an answer for a certain question, the answer is all there. It's probably the biggest sports database that probably top three in the world if I had to guess for the just the amount of information that they have in there. So when I knew that I could find all this information and all I had to do was get better at learning how to query in SQL, that was enough for me to over 2 weeks go from not having done much of it at all besides in school to bugging all of the developers. Hey, how do I write this query? Like, shout out to Kenny Jacqueline over there because he definitely helped me get a lot better at SQL. He's like one of their baseball developers, but I definitely learned a lot, not just in the appreciation for the stats, but also just like the SQL querying just on a database I was interested in. I think went a long way compared to working with sales databases in classes or something like that. I wasn't as interested in.
Yeah, well, I bet you got pretty good at SQL in that time too. And to me, that hits on another really important point is that it seems like if you're really interested in the data you're using, you're really interested in the task at hand, it's going to be a lot easier to
Yeah,
obsess with the tools and learn about it because it's relevant to you getting the exact information that you want. That's exactly how I essentially was when I was early in my career. Is I wanted to solve this specific problem, and I got really good at using the tools that would help me solve that specific problem. I didn't personally care about. I mean, you might care about like, oh, I want to get really good at SQL, but you were
right.
probably more concerned with I want to get this exact information and cut it in this way and be able to get this output. And that is an incredible motivator, at least for me. Is like, I know this insight or this data point is out there, and I want to be able to make it actionable. I want to be able to seize it, and the tools are what or like familiarity with the tools are what allow you to get to that point. And just really leveraging or focusing on the end goal is what made me kind of fall in love with the process too, which I think a lot of people, they're just like, oh, they want to get good at data science, right? But without aiming that at something, it's kind of hard to get good at data science or hard to get good at SQL or any of these things because it's so broad.
Yeah, I definitely learned way more about SQL, like just in the 2 or 3 month span of working on their team than I have in school, and probably 2 or 3 classes that at least touched on SQL a little bit. And that's not the fault of my professors, who are all great at teaching it. It's just more of just a me like getting motivated to learn this kind of thing. Like I've taken one class that was heavily SQL based after the internship, and I feel like I was able to breeze through it and help a lot of people understand it just because I had learned it through something that I actually had cared about instead of just some random database that had no personal connection. I don't care how many people at the like what the average salary for a company is in this fake database. Like I sure I could find it, but like, do I really care? No, but like I do care like what the highest team batting average is from a team shortstop or second baseman in a season or something like that. Like that's like a lot for me more interest. I know not everyone has the same interest, but there are databases for everything out there that my recommendation is if you want to learn SQL, it's definitely doable in school, but it's more. I think it's more trivial to do it in school just because you're more just like the data doesn't you don't relate to the data as much as if you download a database of things that you like and questions that you personally want to answer instead of here's a database that you don't care about and here are questions that your professor wants you to answer. Like it feels a lot more like a job that way than it does like, oh, like I want to do this because I want to know the answer to it.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think part of, at least for me, the a lot of the most valuable learning came from nuance and the edge cases and really diving in and going down rabbit holes. And
Yeah,
in school, you kind of have the end goal really clear and present in front of you. And in research like what you're doing, it sort of builds on itself. So it's like, oh, this statistic's pretty interesting, but what about previous years, or what about um, you know changing it in this little way and rerunning the query? And I think that, at least for me, that's where I probably learned the majority of the things that I know about the data domain is working on these things and like wanting to go a level deeper and wanting to go chase this idea that I had. And I would argue I think education's important, but I probably learned 70-80% of the things that I know about my data work from working on projects or doing it myself, or you learn a concept in school and then you apply it outside of the classroom and you're like, oh, this is how it really works, and this is how
yeah,
I have to do it with this data. And then you go on YouTube and I would watch a lot of StatQuest videos to try and
yeah,
figure out the theory so I could actually make it work. um,
yeah.
Well, so going, yeah, I think that's a good segue when we're talking about theory versus application. You did work with the Astros, if I recall correctly, and I'm wondering what that was like. So you're looking at essentially um, descriptive statistics or reference material and finding sort of fun and interesting facts to then trying to make those things actionable for a team. So teams care about winning effectively, or if you're on the other side of the house, they care about making money and getting butts on seats.
Yeah.
How do you make that transition from just interest to creating value in an internship like that?
Yeah, I've always been interested in like the analytical like part of baseball. Obviously, also interested in the fun facts, which is most of my Twitter. But I think throughout the Twitter account, I've also learned a lot from reading more advanced people's like writing about baseball. I've learned a lot about the analytical, predictive side of the game. So I think I was really excited. Like that was my dream job when. So that's kind of like been the goal I've working to. I know that my Twitter account isn't necessarily like, hand in hand with that side of baseball, but I've always been really interested in it. And I think that the data science education that I have definitely helped a lot in learning all of these machine learning techniques or theory or whatever. But I think the main thing was just like going to work every day, which was a first because the baseball reference one was remote. So it was new going. It was my first real in person job that I had really worked. But going to work every day and just like working on a project from start to finish. I think I know it's different with every team, but the way the Astros were they were basically like, okay, like what are you interested in? So I gave them a list of things that I would want to research. Some of the stuff they already had in house, which I was cool. It was really cool to see what they had done on those points of interest for me. But then there are some things that they hadn't looked into, and they're like, okay, like this definitely has enough value to us that we'll have one of our interns making an hourly rate. You can work on it, like have fun, like knock our socks off, whatever. So it was cool. First of all, just working on things that wanted to find the answers to that the public data necessarily like wasn't where it needed to be for me to just answer it for fun outside of the job. But it was really cool just seeing how a project goes from here's all this data that we either get from an API or it's in a SQL database somewhere to here's an end goal, here's a metric that we can describe our player space off of that is something that's new. So it goes from obviously just like analyzing how the database is set up to joining all the tables to get all of the relevant information to looking at the information, which is like looking at like visualizations or trying to find outliers, trying to find if the data is sufficient to solve this problem to then actually trying to create models to create the stat. And then once you have those models, seeing if they're good, seeing if they're good for predicting things that you don't know, see how they handle past years and future years and stuff like that. And then after you have this all done, like going through this a few different times, trying to find the best way to solve the problem, presenting to these people who are way smarter than me, how I'll have these high up college degrees that I don't have, which was really intimidating to me at first, but I realized that they were really interested in what I was presenting, whether or not they were pretending or not. But
I'm
I think
sure they
just the whole
weren't
process.
pretending.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of help along the way on these projects, but it really felt like something that I had done pretty much like not on my own, but like it felt like my work that was valued by people who obviously are in these positions that I like really would want to work in, and I really value their opinions as well. So I just the whole process of like spending a few weeks or a month working on just one project, answering one problem was way different than anything I had done previously for anything. So I think it really gave me an appreciation for just how the team works together as a team when there are projects that more than one person's working on. Just kind of seeing how everything just worked together. I know the Astros are probably not the exact same as every organization, but I think research and development I kind of realized was like its own kind of field. It's like similar to data science, but the processes are a little bit different, I think. But just seeing how all of it worked together was really cool, especially during the middle of a baseball season. There was a draft that happened while I was there, which was very important to people in the front office. There was a trade deadline, which was obviously very important. And all of these research projects were just going on at the same time as all of these important decisions were being made, some of which were using this data and some of which were not. So just seeing how all of it like went hand in hand, I think was the coolest part for me. And obviously just developing my skills, both like in terms of communication and also just my actual data science skills at the same time. I think it was just a really cool experience. And then obviously get to go to baseball games for free was a nice perk at the end of the day. But yeah, it was a really good time.
Amazing. Well, I definitely have a lot of questions about sort of the nature of that work. But before that, I'm really interested in how you actually landed that role to begin with. What was that process like?
Yeah, so it was another like more unconventional way. Although I actually don't think it's unconventional looking back on it. It was like just um, through knowing people and networking, which I think I kind of took for granted at the time. But I realized that like that's what people do to get jobs. Is obviously you apply for stuff, but you also try and connect with people who do the jobs or who make the hiring decisions. So as it turns out, so I was the president of the sports analytics club at my college at Purdue, and so this club was started, I think, a few years, 4 or 5 years before I got there, if I had to guess. And the person who founded it, she actually she was a computer science major at Purdue before they had data science. And her first job out of college, after she founded and was president of this club, was a machine learning engineer for the Astros, and she still works there now. So I had been in touch with her, just talking about the club, talking about Purdue, trying to make things like obviously have her vision in mind when working on club things, but just kind of keeping her in touch. We had her in for a guest speaker opportunity one time, so I had like known her like sort of vaguely, like, but it was still a cool connection to have. And so I was looking for jobs for internships in baseball and remembered that she works for the Astros. So I sent her an email, hey, like, can I send you my resume to send to someone who is hiring interns if there's an internship opening? And so this wasn't even for a job that was posted online or anything. This is before they even posted these internships. It was like at this time last year, maybe a little bit later into the fall semester, before they would even have these internship opportunities open. And so she passed along my resume to the director of R&D. I had a couple of interviews, filled out a couple of questionnaires, like projects, and in the end was able to get the opportunity. I don't know if I was competing against anybody else or just trying to demonstrate to them that I'm good enough for the job or whatever. But it was a combination of like just having her as a connection, and then obviously being able to explain to people who I don't actually know like why I'm fit for the job. And I think that you can do a similar thing even with people who you aren't as connected with, just by finding people who work in a job that you want to work for, connecting with them on LinkedIn, finding something you have in common with them, and kind of just building up that connection. I think it's a little bit more artificial if you connect with them and a week later are like, hey, like, can I, like, do you have any jobs open? Whereas like if you kind of just build a connection over time, like actually interested in what they do, want to learn from them, I think as you build that relationship, I think they'd be more willing to um, as they learn more about you as well, be more willing to put you in contact with people who could make those decisions.
I love that so much. I think that first, anyone who's in college listening to this, join your sports analytics club at your school, and if there
Yes.
isn't one, start it. I actually
Yes.
started one when I was in grad school at DePaul. I
Awesome.
didn't actually do anything with it. We had a couple meetings, but at the same time, it's still on my resume. I was still able to tell that story, and there's again so many actual things, so many warm connections you could make like that. That you know sometimes you just have to be aware of the opportunities, but again, it's simple, not necessarily easy. Another thing that I've seen a lot of college students do, and some have done a lot better of sticking with it than others, but they'll start a podcast or they'll start a blog and they'll interview these people. So it's not like, hey, I'm asking for you for a job or anything like that, but like, 3 4 months before, they're having this person on their podcast, they're getting to know them, they're having these conversations, and then later when they're actually looking for a job, they've already established that connection with that person, where it wasn't about that person, it wasn't about me, give me a job, it was about you, tell your story. And that whole relationship, the dynamic of it is completely different, because you're not just asking for something without creating value. You've already given this person a platform to tell their story, and or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And to me, it's all about how you frame the relationships, whether it's as peers, whether it's as um, someone, two friends helping each other out, rather than just one person
Yeah.
asking another person for a role.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. I think that there, especially if you find your own like niche, like I think there are a lot of sports or data science podcasts that are out there. If you find your own angle to take on it, whether it's just like some specific, maybe it's just a question you ask every person at the beginning of the interview, or some different approach for like how you format your stuff, or just like something that makes it recognizable. So it's not just another sports podcast or sports blog. It's something that you're adding that you can't find anywhere else. I think a combination of that and then just finding those people. I think most people who work in sports analytics who are allowed to go on these podcasts are more than happy to, just because people like talking about themselves, number one, but also just because I think um, they know how many people would love to hear about their experiences who want to do the same things as them too. So I think people, if you're listening to this, you probably won't have that much trouble finding, excuse me, people to talk about whatever field you're into. I think most professionals are down for that.
Yeah, I mean, you think it's intimidating and all of this stuff, but then you realize a lot of these people, they want to give these interviews. I mean, there's
Yeah,
some like a super high tier where their time is really valuable. Like if I was to try to get, for example, Lex Friedman on the podcast, I don't think that I have the scalar as much value that I could drive for him because he's probably getting a lot of requests. But like your average machine learning engineer at an MLB team is probably not fielding a ton of requests for podcast interviews. Maybe a few
right.
here
I'm
and
sure
there,
they're
but
just as excited to talk about their job with someone who they don't work with, who doesn't isn't like. I mean, I'm sure most of the people who work in analytics departments, most of the people they talked about their job are people who they work with. It's very in depth, very like hardcore specific stuff. Whereas it's kind of nice to take a step back and just talk about what you do every day instead of just talking very specifically on a very like well, not like I guess low level about it, not in like a bad way, but like in a very specific way about what you do. I think that's definitely nice for them to take a step back as well.
yeah, and there's something that's less intimidating about a format like this as well. I mean, a lot of these people, they're paying to go to conferences to go speak at them. I mean, usually if you speak, you get in for free, but sometimes you still have to pay your hotel and stuff. Like very rare in a lot of the sports space to be actually getting paid to present.
Right.
Um, and you're like, oh, they get that exposure. They get to go on a platform and talk for free or for a lot less effort than it is to put together
Yeah.
this well researched presentation. And genuinely, a lot of them really enjoy that communication.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. So I definitely do want to touch on like Major League Baseball a little bit and what it's like to work for a team. I think something that I'm interested in is how does that differ from working, for example, with Baseball Reference? Like, how is the data different? Is there a different type of data that you're using relative to what the public has access to? I know that's something I see in a lot of the sports that I work in. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, the data is a lot more detailed. It's a lot bigger at these like these teams. I'm sure most teams have access to this pretty much the same data. Whereas like at Baseball Reference, they have a lot of they're very focused on very detailed historical stats. And obviously they're very detailed, but they only have so much detail for players who played in 1965. You have all of their game logs and then anything you could find from their game logs, their biographical information, which is a lot of stuff when you have 20,000 Major League Baseball players. But when you're looking at what teams have access to, like they have access to every single baseball play that's happened since Statcast started. They have a new system now. It's called Hawkeye, and these teams basically not only have access to how hard each pitch is, how much it moves. They also have access to these pretty much all of the data that these cameras spit out. These high quality cameras that are set up in every stadium, and they track where every player is. So for every game, for every play, you can look at where each player is on the field. I think it's 10 times every second. So it's 10 frames per second. And they not only is it where the player is, but it's also where each of their joints are. So you can look at where a player's right wrist is 10 times per second for every single play for every season that this data exists. So you can do a lot of really cool things with this. So you have these I think they get like terabytes of data per season just in terms of this player tracking information, which is way more than what they have at Sports Reference or one of these like online data websites, which is not a knock on Baseball Reference. It's just not how their data is meant to be to the people who are using it. People don't want to go to Baseball Reference and just see a list of coordinates for every baseball player that where their left ankle is every play. Like that doesn't mean anything to them. But to a team, you can use this stuff for a variety of ways. For example, diagnosing injuries. If a player is moving, for example, a pitcher, if they're moving their right wrist at a different angle than they usually do, that could be an indicator that they're maybe easing off their normal pitching like technique because they're hurt, their arm is hurt. They're trying to make it less stressful for them. And so that's just one of a number of areas that this data is useful for. But the possibilities are endless, and that's why these teams are hiring so many more people than they were 10 years ago. It's just this data is so much bigger, and what you can do with it is so important to these teams that if you're going to pay a data scientist 100 grand a year or whatever it is to work for a team to, for example, just get a little bit of value or save a player from an injury or at least diagnose an injury before it gets too severe, or just being able to find these small insights, it's almost just as valuable to hire a team of 10 or 20 of those as it is to hire a middle relief pitcher who's going to be below average that you're going to pay $2 million. Obviously, having good players is important, but also this, I think teams have started to realize that you can spend this money in different areas. Again, that's not to say that like teams shouldn't spend a lot of money. Like the teams who spend 200, $300 million on their players every year are going to be the best teams year in and year out. But the extra value you get with that, maybe $2 or $3 million extra to hire a team of PhDs who have very different backgrounds, could probably go a little bit more than signing some extra middle relief pitcher, for example. And that's not to like like over exaggerate my value that I brought to the Astros. I don't think I added too much of importance for them, but I think in the whole, I think the idea is that you can. It's not like you need to be like the Moneyball A's who cut costs at all points and just hire like a nerd to do all the decisions for you. That's not the way to go. But the point is like there's definitely room to have a good team to spend a lot of money, but also spend a lot of money in places where the talent is a lot cheaper and you can get very meaningful like benefits from it. Not just on saving money, but also on like helping players get better or preventing them from getting hurt, for example. I think a lot of people see it as we're saving, and analytics seems to save their owners money on players. They're trying to be as efficient as possible, which is a lot of it. But at the same time, there's also a lot of analytics which goes towards making players better at baseball in player development or in terms of like injury prevention or stuff like that.
Yeah, that's something that I've been paying very close attention to, and I've been thinking about trying to model. Is like, what's the return on investment of hiring a data team versus, you know, getting another player for, let's say, something like $10 million a year,
Right.
right?
I
You
just saw
can,
I just saw a graph on Reddit today. I think it was a graph that showed each team's payroll and then each team the number of people who are considered in baseball analytics for that team. And most of the team, it was like number of analytics people on the x-axis and number of like payroll on the y-axis. And obviously payroll is important, and you see the teams that spend a lot of money are generally the most successful. But also the teams on the right of the graph, the teams that have huge analytics departments, they're also those organizations that are not just the successful ones, but also the ones that seem to always have a good farm system, or the teams that always seem to have a good young talent, or at least recently, since the analytics boom has happened, have like model organizations, even though they're not spending as much money as the Dodgers per se. There's definitely a lot of value. Like I didn't run like any kind of regression on it or anything to find like what you're looking for exactly, but qualitatively, it looked like the teams on the right were doing a lot better than the teams on the left, as well as the teams up top doing a lot better than teams on the bottom.
yeah, and that's also to say that hopefully people on the analytics team don't get hurt.
Right.
People on the
Yes.
analytics team also have a lag in the amount of value that they create. When
Right.
those
That is
people are
true.
coming in, the lag starts in the farm system and improving the quality of prospects and improving the training and coaching and whatever it is, and it trickles up over time. So I expect, you know, the value of the analytics team presents itself in 3 to 5 to 10 years rather than a player usually in the immediate term. And so
Right.
I don't think teams are looking at that investment necessarily in the same way. They're looking at it 1 to 1 for this year. Yeah, we hire a team of analytics guys versus one player that we can quantify roughly how many wins they can add to our team. But the time lag and the longevity of analytics teams or building out infrastructure, those are things that are more difficult to quantify. But if you want to win, probably should be
Yes,
quantified in some way. You had
definitely.
you had mentioned about how there's an ever increasing amount of data that these teams have access to. In some sense, that also presents quite a few problems as well. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of problems. I think number one, I think there's definitely some like ethical issues that are in play. I think if I'm a player, I'm not necessarily the most like happy that my team has access to every single bit of information about how my body moves every time I'm performing my job for them, because that's not something that's normal in jobs. You don't, when you go to work every day, you don't have a camera on you that's tracking your fingers if you're at any sort of job that actually cares about you. Like maybe there are some places that like have eye trackers or whatever, but like that would be like the equivalent of like going to a job and like them putting an eye tracker on your computer to make sure that you're looking at your computer enough times per day. I don't think it's as extreme because I think baseball, I think there's definitely some understanding between players and teams that the goal is to help them get better. But at the same time, like there's definitely some ethical concerns about all these teams having all this information on players where the players don't have the information themselves, which I think is a little bit of an issue. I think that hopefully can get more worked out in terms of what is good and what is bad. I think that kind of presents itself too when I was working at Sports Reference. They have these college basketball and college football sites. Is it ethical to keep stats and publish them on minors pretty much? Like there are college kids who are 17 years old, like, and they have, is it ethical to put their birthday on there, their place of birth, what high school they went to? Is that like something that we should, these kids are 17 years old, they're kids. Is that something we should be publishing on them? So I think number one, with any subject, with more data becomes more like moral, ethical concerns. I think that's definitely something that's probably not talked about enough in baseball. But then also number two is just, I think the increasing number of data, it creates a lot of problems for people who for teams that don't know what to prioritize. It's really difficult to get all this data and be like, what should we do with it? Like, you need a team of people who are professionals in this industry, to be able to not only like know what to do with the data, but like just what to prioritize. I think that's important. I think, I don't know if it's good for the game or bad for the game, but the teams who have more, these teams built out, are going to have a significant competitive advantage over the teams that don't. They have for the last 5, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. But that gap between like the best organizations and the worst organizations when it comes to analytics, it's going to grow even more, because it's going to be hard for these teams, unless they have a major regime change where they fire the GM and stuff and hire a bunch of new people. It still takes a little bit of time to build out all of these systems to give the data scientists the capacity to even find this stuff. But when teams are willingly only hiring a few people to work in these departments just so it looks like they have some money going to it because every other team does, and then you have other teams like the Rays, the Dodgers, who have 20, 30, 40 people working as a huge team and a huge collaborative effort, like, it's not, I don't think it's a bad thing that like these teams are being rewarded for it. But if you're a fan of like competitive baseball, like, I think the range in terms of like teams is going to grow ever more the more data there is. Just the more data that the bad teams aren't using that the good teams are using, the more the information gap will grow. And you'll see teams who struggle to develop prospects, who struggle to draft, who consistently sign bad free agents. It's not because their GM is stupid. It's just because they're competing against teams who have so much more information or are willingly using this information more. So I think that's the second problem. Is, I don't know if it's a problem because it shows my value as I become a professional in this industry, that I can bring to a team and be like, hey, like, this is important to have. But I think it might be a little bit of a problem for other teams. I think the third thing that I just thought of is just in the quality of the game. I think that you see a lot of teams taking more unconventional strategies that don't necessarily look like how baseball is. I think you see, obviously, pitchers are throwing harder than ever. They're taking a lot of time in between pitches. The players are standing in weird places. Players are striking out a lot more, hitting more home runs. The game is a lot different than it was 30 years ago. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to analytics or like just a change in priorities. I'd more so say. But I think that you see the game become a little bit more monotonous as these ideal, like, the winning strategies take over, even though if they're not like the most pretty to watch.
So that presents the obvious question: how do you feel about the new rule set? So the three things that they changed are larger bases, which I doubt you'll have any real issue with. Um, Also, a pitch clock, as well as limiting shifts. Uh, you know, what do those mean for the future of baseball?
Yeah, I think all of the changes that they added were like with the right idea in mind. I think it's like people will get on the league for like adding rule changes to change things about the game that we've always loved. But like, if you look at baseball 30 years ago and you look at it now, like, which is a more fun like way to watch baseball? I think it's debatable for sure, but there are definitely some aspects of 1980s baseball that a lot of fans miss. Number one, the games were 30% shorter, which the pitch clock is going to help a lot. They didn't. There were a lot more singles, a lot more stolen bases, fewer home runs. The game was more diverse in terms of its strategy. So I don't think that the league should not be intervening when it thinks that it can change the strategy, because the teams aren't going to. The teams are going to do everything they can to win a baseball game. The teams' analytics departments don't care how many people are going to MLB games around the league. They just care about if they're going to win two more games, and they wouldn't if they didn't institute the strategy. So I think it's the league instituting changes in itself isn't a bad thing. I think a lot of people are opposed to change. I'm not necessarily like one of those people. I do think the pitch clock is really, really good. I went to a minor league game earlier this year. It was like 9 to 5, and the game was over in 2.5 hours, which was really, really weird to me, because I'm usually those games that are that high scoring are probably like 3.5, 3 hours and 40 minutes. Like, it was really impressive. And it wasn't just like the game was shorter. It was still 9 innings long, but the game was quicker, the pace was better. I think that that is a really good change for baseball. And I think a lot of people doubt if someone will watch a baseball game because it's 30 minutes shorter on average. I almost guarantee you that people will watch baseball because not only is it 30 minutes, it's like, what is that converted to as a percentage? Like 17% shorter. Like every break is 17% less. It's a lot easier to watch the game. That 15-17% extra is a lot. It's nothing. It's just people standing around doing nothing, which is what people kind of make a mockery of baseball. It's just people standing around and then they occasionally will throw a ball. Well, now there's a little bit less standing around. I think that's really good. With the bases, I think that's another good change. It probably reduces injuries by a little bit. It also makes it so there's less of a distance players have to go to steal a base, which maybe means slightly more stolen bases, which I think would be a good thing for baseball. And then the last thing is the shift. I think that's the most controversial. I'm not opposed to like the idea of it. I think MLB wants there to be more singles in the game, and I think reducing the shifts or like legislating where players can stand is one way to do it. And I think there will be more singles, but I think they kind of went about it in more of like a rush way that didn't really evaluate like what the problem was in the first place. I think the issue to me is not the singles going down and the homers going, or like the singles going down. It's not, the issue isn't that the fielders are taking them away. It's just that the players who are playing baseball don't want to hit singles. They want to hit home runs because home runs are more valuable. So to me, Major League Baseball should be making singles more valuable and not making them easier to get, because the players aren't going to change their strategies. They're still going to try and hit home runs, but just now when they don't hit the home runs, it's going to be a single instead of a ground out sometimes. It's kind of like an evolution problem. Like you have these two, like imagine these two groups in baseball. You have the home run hitters who are mostly lefties who get shifted on a lot, and then you have the contact the spray hitters who are faster and they hit the ball to all fields. They don't hit as many home runs, but they hit a lot of singles. You have these like two competing groups who are competing for roster spots or whatever it is. And so there's probably not a great balance of it right now. There's definitely more power hitters than I think is ideal in baseball compared to 30, 40 years ago. But then you just add a rule change that makes the game even easier for power hitters, because now one of their downfalls, one of their like the things that was like checking them from being really good, the shift is now gone. Whereas these contact hitters, they don't see any change to make them more valuable. I think that's what they needed to do, was make these contact hitters more valuable. But instead, these power hitters are more valuable because they're going to get more singles, whereas these contact hitters aren't going to be getting more hits. So now the game is easier for these power hitters, these lefties, and I think you'll see even more of them in the majors. You'll see more singles, sure, but you're not going to see the fewer of these sellout power hitters, which right now is a decent strategy in baseball. But I think you're just going to see more of those, and then just seeing them hit more singles instead of seeing more of those fun Ricky Henderson, Tony Gwynn type players, because you're not making singles more valuable. You're just making them easier to get for the players who aren't as fun to watch as Tony Gwynn or Ricky Henderson or whatever like that.
So, how would you propose making that other group of players, the more maybe well-rounded hitters, more valuable?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways you can do that. I think the idea is not to make the the players. I mean, like obviously the end goal is to make the players more valuable, but like I said, it's not to make there be like more singles isn't necessarily the answer unless those singles are going to guys who are traditionally singles hitters. So I think one way you could do that is by making, instead of making the home run hitter more valuable by banning the shift, you can make ground balls more valuable by, for example, moving the bases a little closer together, which they kind of did with making the bases bigger, but it's like what, 3 inch or 6 inch different. It's not a huge deal. But if you instead treat like the baseline like it's the NBA 3 point line, and you see, okay, 3 pointers are being made at a higher clip than ever before, we're gonna move the 3 point line back to make 3 point shooters a little bit less valuable. You can move the bases closer to each other so that you're not hurting. It's not harder to hit a home run, but hitting the ball on the ground is a little bit more valuable because now you can beat those ground balls out at a little bit of a higher clip. If you're faster or if you hit more ground balls, you could get more hits that way. But instead, you're kind of, the shift doesn't really do that. So I think like moving the bases shorter or closer towards each other is one of those changes that makes the game easier for contact hitters disproportionately compared to power hitters. Whereas I think the shift rule, again, it will add more singles, but I don't think it changes the style of the game as much as they would hope. I think another rule change that I'm really fond of that's kind of like really outside of the box. And I don't think it does. It's not as extreme, but it's also kind of wacky. I think that you know how like right now they have the extra inning rule where a runner starts on second base in the 10th inning. I think that's kind of a stupid rule. I think my rule is also kind of stupid, but what I think should happen is starting in the 10th inning, each team should lose one defender. So in the 10th inning, when if you're tied after 9 innings, you go to the 10th. Each team has to play 8 fielders, and you can put your fielders wherever you want. There's no shift
No
restrictions.
pitcher.
Yeah, no, yeah, we're gonna get rid of the pitcher. We're gonna protest the game. No, but ideally, you take away an outfielder, you take away an infielder, and then each inning the game goes on further. You lose one more fielder until you're at like 6, and then you just stop at 6 and play the rest of the game. Obviously, the games are going to end quicker in terms of innings because it's going to be more runs scored because there are fewer fielders. But at the same time, think about all these teams. These every team plays between what 10 or 20 extra inning games per year. They're going to see this as an incredible opportunity. Number one, they want fielders that are quicker, that can get cover more range because in these games, it's these players are more valuable. So they're a little bit more valuable overall across all games because they're so much more valuable when the game goes into extra innings. So that increases the value of players who are faster. So maybe you see rosters tend towards a little bit faster players compared to the slower ones. And then also you see contact being valued for the same reason because a home run is worth the same amount no matter how many fielders there are. But a line drive that is not a home run is worth so much more when there's fewer defenders because there's just fewer people who can catch it. So you see those contact skills being way more important in extra innings and then aggregated over all of the games a little bit more important overall. And that's just one of the things that like number one, I think it's incredibly entertaining to see the strategy behind where teams put guys in extra innings and like what they do when they have to play 7 guys. I think it's kind of fun and exciting baseball. It allows players to show off their athletic abilities, I think more so than having 9 players on the field. But at the same time, it prioritizes those speed and contact guys. And it says your power isn't as important in extra innings. It's more important to just put the ball in play, which is what baseball needs. It needs more balls in plays. Pitchers are going to keep getting better. It's going to be harder to legislate that. Like it's going to be harder to make pitchers worse. At the same time, you just need to change where the priorities are for hitters. And right now, I don't think the shift, banning the shift changes any priorities whatsoever.
Interesting. I dig it. I dig it. So, okay. One last quick question. What do you think the future of baseball analytics is?
Yeah, I mean, if I could tell you, I think that would be a very good step for me to in terms of like getting a job and getting promoted very quickly. Because I think if anyone can tell you the answer with a lot of certainty, they're definitely a well qualified candidate if they're
Or they're
if they're
full of
right
shit.
about it. Yeah, or they're full of
Yeah.
shit. Yeah, and maybe that'll help them get a job anyways in the meantime. But I think as it stands right now, it's going to be a race between teams and the league. Teams we're going to see how much they can get away with by not like get away with in like a cheating way, but like a get away with in how extreme can we make like can we do things that are within the rules. Obviously, you have the shift legislation. Maybe the shift legislation gets more extreme as teams figure out a way around the current rules to best optimize getting out. But you'll see that race between what is fun to watch and what is winning games. I think you'll see that race between the league and the teams continue. I think you'll also see just as the amount of data increases, you're going to see these so many more systems that teams are getting that they don't know what to do with, that they need to hire more people to do. And I think there's also this kind of this trend where as teams get more data, the public gets more data. It's usually on like a 3 to 5 year lag that whatever teams have the public will be able to play with in 3 or 5 or 7 years or whatever. So I think there's going to be a lot more data for the public to be able to play around with in the near future and in the further future as teams keep getting all this additional stuff. So I think it's a bright future for not just baseball analytics in general, but also sports analytics. And I think baseball is looking bright too as well. I think the pitch clock to me, I obviously went on that long rant about the shift, but the pitch clock is more of a positive to me than the banning the shift is in terms of any negative. I think that's the biggest thing that baseball could have done to not save baseball. I don't think it was as dire as a situation as people made it out to be, but I think it's going to do a lot to improve the quality of just the watchability of the game. So I think as baseball continues to be popular and hopefully stays popular, baseball analytics will always have its place. But the problem is if baseball fades into like obscurity, then baseball analytics doesn't have as much of a role because teams are making less money and they have less money to spend on analytics and players. So I think the number one priority is keeping baseball fun and popular and watchable. And then as that continues, I think analytics will always have its place.
Amazing, Jeremy. This was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people learn more about you? where can people catch up with you if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah, so my Twitter is MLB Random Stats. You can follow me on there. If you have any questions or want to chat, my direct messages are open. I also have a LinkedIn, which I think is just linkedin.com/Jeremy Frank, probably. You can look me up. It'll say I'm a data science student at Purdue University. If that's the one you find, that's me. Feel free to connect. If you have if you want to chat or connect or whatever, I'm always happy to talk. So I think those are the two best places for anyone listening to this. My books are available on Amazon if you want to learn more about baseball history through a statistical lens. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Ken. It was a great talking to you. And also just thanks everyone for listening. If this is the first time you've heard about me and you're interested in, like I said, follow me on Twitter.
Amazing. I'll link all of your links in the description below as well. So thank you again, Jeremy, and it was a pleasure.